Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon, everybody. Lisa, why don't you go to the next slide? So what I want to do is I just want to tell you a little bit about my Ollie story. Tony had mentioned that in addition to letting you know about all the academic opportunities at Ollie, there are also opportunities to teach for some of you, and that is a path that I have traversed. As Ellen mentioned, my first career was as a computer scientist, software developer, and then technology executive. One of my last companies was invented the massively parallel relational database machine, which is probably something very meaningful to all of you. And we did so well, we were able to sell the company to IBM, and that enabled me to think about transitioning to my second career as a musician and a teacher. Um, I have been a French speaker for most of my life, and in my second chapter of my life, I had gotten involved with a wonderful French book club at the Bethesda Public Library that had been founded by a Maryland professor, a French woman. And while I was there was a woman in the class who asked me if I was taking this class at Ollie, given by Kathleen Sandifer. And I was like, "What's Ollie?" I had no idea. So, I looked into it. I signed up for Kathleen's class. She's absolutely wonderful. She is Sorbonne trained and had taught at Sorbonne and Sciences Po and other places like that. And now has an American husband and lives in the area and teaches a class or two a year. Um, but then after I was involved with that, then I had a friend who knew I was spoke Italian, and he was looking for somebody to help him teach an Italian class. So he said, "Well, how about helping me teach this class?" So I was not ready to teach a class, but I was ready to help with a class. So I did that. Then after that, I had a friend who knew that I was a musician and said, "Well, what? You should be teaching music classes at Ollie." So I started doing that. So you can see I sort of gradually got more and more involved. Next slide, please, Lisa. So, after teaching for some time at Ollie in the spring of 2020, I had just started teaching my class on Johannes Brahms and the Schumanns. It's a story about, many of you may know that there was this close personal relationship between Brahms and the Schumanns, which I won't go into today. Um, After the first week, the pandemic hit, and Tony had to reach out to all the professors to say, is anybody willing to transition to Zoom? And fortunately, we had been experimenting with Zoom, testing a little bit. And I was like, I'm a computer guy. I can do it on Zoom. So I taught my class on Zoom. It went very well. And then in the fall, we were still all Zoom. And I taught a class on Mozart. And I had 330 students online, including, now that I was teaching online, my now almost 99-year-old father signed up for my class from Metropolitan Chicago. I get calls from him after every class with a critique. Fortunately, the critique is always, "That's the best one yet." But anyway, so so once we returned to in person, and we did go through a process of encouraging people to come back into the building, because we do want to emphasize that we are a social club as well as a liberal arts university, and there are benefits to being in the building. Um, but I had this large following online, including my father, so I decided to offer my class in hybrid. And as Tony alluded to, I have had fair amount of success with hybrid. And typically I'll have 80 to 100 people in the classroom, and then over 100 online. Next slide, please. Okay.
To them.
So there we go.
When I listen
Wait,
to this first
wait, hold it. Can you
to
stop
them
there for 1 second? Okay.
to
All right.
them,
So what I want to do now is I want to give you just a taste of what my classes are like. So I typically, it's not 100% the case, but typically, particularly if I'm focusing on a composer or two composers, I will tell the story of that composer's music intertwined with his or her life story. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a deeper appreciation for classical music, for composers and performers. And I found, as a listener, I find it interesting to know the backstory of the composer's life when I'm listening to the music. I do dip into a little bit of music theory at times, not enough to hurt anybody, but certainly to satisfy the appetite of some of our more advanced students. And what you're going to hear in this little clip, so this is a clip from my Mahler class from the spring of 2023. Mahler has become one of the most popular composers in our era, thanks to the great work in the 50s and 60s of Leonard Bernstein. And in fact, the National Symphony Orchestra now is one of the best Mahler orchestras in the world. I grew up in Chicago with the Chicago Symphony, and they were the best Mahler orchestra in the world. So I'm a big fan of Mahler. Love teaching classes about his music. In this one, you'll just get a little sense for. I talk a little bit about the piece, and then I'll play some clips. In this one, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the relationship between Mahler's Sixth Symphony, his tragic symphony, and his life. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how different conductors will play his music differently. And I'll give you, 20 seconds of a recent recording by the Oslo Symphony, which takes his opening march at a gentle pace. And then we'll switch to Bernstein, who takes the opening march at a faster pace. Okay, go ahead now, Lisa. To them. When I listen to this first movement with this march, and then sort of the hints back at that march throughout the symphony, I see Mahler viewing himself as, this is me going forward, doing my job, and I'm moving towards my goals and doing my job. And then stuff starts to happen to him. And so think about it that way. You'll hear suddenly, then you start to hear, sadder sounding little violin sections. You start to hear this mystical music from far away. And then, later on in the fourth movement, he's marching along, and then things happen. And all of a sudden you get this hammer blow. So I do sort of view this as Mahler sort of, in a way, this is a cathartic expression of his own personal psychology, this symphony, where he's saying, here I am, I'm going forward, I'm the successful guy, and everything's going good, and then stuff just happens to him, and can he recover from it? So all right, next slide. Paul Becker, one of the many. So we've talked a little bit about tempi in Mahler, and there are many different interpretations. We've talked about Klemperer, who tends to be on the far end of, let's play Mahler as slowly as possible. I want to savor every note. And then you have Bernstein, who tends to like sort of the widest range of extremes in the tempi. He'll play certain things almost as slowly as Klemperer, and other things as wildly and as frenzied as anybody. Orozco Estrada tends to be and Abbado tend to be a little bit on the aggressive side, which I historically have liked, although there are times when I think it's better to play some of the stuff more slowly. So this guy with the Oslo Symphony, this is Juha-Pekka Saraste, I think. Yeah, Juha-Pekka Saraste. And he's conducting that Oslo Philharmonic, which we heard with Mahler 1, with the young guy. He's a little bit on the slow side, but it's very beautiful. And so I want to give you the first couple of minutes of this opening march, and then I'm going to give you Bernstein playing it a little more aggressively. So here's the Oslo with Saraste playing the opening march from the first movement. So we've talked a little bit about tempi in Mahler, and there we go. Okay, so now here's Bernstein. So this is from the 70s with the Vienna Philharmonic. The Oslo thing is just from last year, and you're going to hear this first march taken significantly faster. Okay, thank you, Lisa. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So you might have noticed that Bernstein, in trying to play it at a faster tempo, initially had trouble getting the Vienna Philharmonic to play at his tempo. They are renowned for that, I will say, but we'll leave that for another day. Okay, as I mentioned before, I'm going to wrap up. The Mozart class had a lot of students. And at the end, people said to me, gee, Mozart, you could have done that over 2 semesters. So that's what I'm going to do this year. People have been asking me for several years to teach a class on Johann Sebastian Bach, and I am undertaking that. That is my summer vacation project. I'm developing 2 classes on Bach that I will begin to offer on September 23rd and then again in the spring. And again, I'm going to cover his life story. It's going to be as chronological as you can be with Bach. But you'll hear, his toccata and fugue in D minor, his great cantatas, B minor Mass, St. Matthew Passion, and plenty more. Okay. And